So is the solution, if you don't want to mistreat animals, based on what you're saying, is the solution then to eat fish? Is the solution, if you don't want to mistreat animals, is the solution to eat fish?
I'd say no. It's really interesting. There has been an incredible amount of science done in the last, 10, 20 years on fish, and whether they feel pain, whether they're conscious, all of these kinds of things. And what we're learning is it's really amazing. We have absolutely scientifically proven, just like land animals, fish do suffer. They do feel pain when they are exposed to something painful. They will rub the area. They will avoid painful stimuli. So their behavior suggests that they absolutely do feel pain. And the way we kill these billions of fish is really brutal. Taking them out of the water, the suffocation it's just like us drowning. It's a very violent, frightening, awful death, and sometimes they are just cut up alive and conscious. There was an undercover investigation that Mercy for Animals did on a catfish production. And these catfish were, just on the ice, and they were still conscious, and they were being cut up alive, and you could see the fish writhing. They're feeling that. It's brutal the way we kill fish, absolutely. And another aspect that we're learning through science is that fish are actually much more intelligent than we give them credit for. Much more going on there than we previously thought. They have absolutely emotional capacity. They have long-term memory. There's kind of this myth like that goldfish they can only remember 3 minutes or whatever. Absolutely untrue. They've done studies where there were fish that were, when they flipped a switch or pushed a lever or something like that, only a certain time of day they got the food. And so they wouldn't hit the lever until it was that time of day. Like they learned that it was that, a certain time of day that they hit the lever and they get the food. So then they'd stop hitting the lever until it was that time of day. Then they'd take the fish out of that situation for up to a year, put them back, and they remembered. So, they have a lot more intelligence than we give them credit for, and we are just brutally slaughtering them by the millions and causing an ecological crisis in our oceans with overfishing.
Yeah, and I'll just again, I have a real thing for fish, but I think, we talk about how terrible animal agriculture is or factory farming is to land animals. Aquaculture, or the factory farming basically of water animals, takes that to a whole other level in terms of cruelty. And I've seen these places. There's two kinds of aquaculture. Some are offshore, some are like big swimming pools. And I remember looking into these, and it's just black water. I thought there was nothing in there except black water. I didn't think there was anything in there. And then as I kept looking, I realized that this black water was actually packed with fish. There were so many fish in there, they could hardly move, and they were just kind of packed in there, and they could hardly, like I say, swim. And they were swimming in their own feces. That's why the water was black, and there were workers dumping in different kinds of chemicals and antibiotics to keep them alive. And so this kind of suffering to these animals, and very often if they're, for example, salmon, if they're being factory farmed in offshore pens, there's sea lice, which normally in the wild are not a problem for salmon because the salmon are swimming. But when they can't get away, they're surrounded by huge clouds of sea lice, which actually eat them from the outside in. And it's, again, enormously painful for these poor salmon. They can't escape, and they're getting eaten. So, of course, the workers don't want that to happen. So they're, again, dumping in all kinds of chemicals and pesticides to try to kill the sea lice. Which are also not only attacking the salmon, but any other fish that happen to be swimming by the area get also attacked by sea lice. And so we're finding that the aquaculture operations are not only extremely cruel to the fish. I mean, you think about the cruelty to these poor animals. They're factory farming tuna fish now. I mean, tuna fish are animals that celebrate their lives swimming up to 40 or 50 miles an hour, covering literally hundreds or thousands of miles, and they're spending their entire life in a metal cage. And people are eating this, being told they're getting their healthy omega-3s. You know, I mean, the extent of the cruelty, the abuse, and the toxins that concentrate, it boggles the mind. And as Hope said, I think it's very important to remember that the scientific evidence is that fish have intelligence at the level of non-human primates. They're completely sentient. And they're by far, I think, they suffer the most. I mean, there's many more water animals being killed in a variety of ways. Octopuses and other animals. These are all animals with a tremendous intelligence. So I think it's really, when we move to a more compassionate diet, I think it's important to remember that doesn't include fish. People have this idea that they're cold-blooded or something, so they don't feel. And I think that's a huge mistake to make. And it's kind of too bad also to see so many communities having fishing derbies and teaching kids how to fish and having the grandparents come down and show them the joys of fishing. And, I see this happens in communities everywhere. And there's this complete disconnection that what I'm actually teaching my grandson or granddaughters, a lot of times little girls too, when they're in there fishing, to completely disconnect from any natural sense of caring or kindness for another living being and just play the animal on the line. And the other thing they've discovered too, which I think is important to remember, that when we're doing just fishing where we throw the fish back, very often they die. I mean, it depends on the species and a lot of other statistics. I talk about it in the World Peace Diet, but essentially this playing of animals, fishing without eating them, obviously is extremely traumatic to these animals and very often kills them. So we obviously we have a long way to go in our treatment of animals on this planet, of fish.
And I'll just expand a little bit on what Will said, which is that fish feel. Historically, there's this conventional wisdom that fish and crustaceans don't feel pain, perhaps because they don't vocalize. You never hear a fish screaming. You never hear a crab or a shrimp or a lobster screaming, but they just lack vocal cords. But plenty of research has been done that show that fish and crustaceans do, in fact, feel pain. And while I'm not a fan of intentionally torturing animals to see if they feel pain, I think the research is interesting, and I just want to tell you about it for a second. Trout had bee venom injected in their face, and as a result, they engaged in aversive behavior, and they engaged in behavior that indicated they were in pain. They rocked back and forth. They tried to rub their face against the side of their enclosure. And later, when they were injected with morphine, which reversed or temporarily eliminated the pain effects, they stopped those behaviors. So the trout feel pain. Prawns, in one study, had stinging chemicals applied to their antennae, and they exhibited similar aversive behavior to get away from those chemicals. In another study, crabs were subjected to electric shocks, and they also showed aversive behavior. So to the extent that there ever was an idea that fish, crustaceans, or other animals don't feel pain, we now know that that's simply nonsense and that they do suffer. And that, for example, when fish are eviscerated and left to die, they can suffer for 20 or 30 minutes as they die slowly.